Hi, everyone. It's Melanie Warner here with Defining Moments TV. We are here live at 5 every Thursday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and somewhere in the middle of the night in other parts of the world, I'm sure. So if you're joining us live, thank you for being here. I know it's a lot for you to be up at this time of the night if it's in Europe, if you're definitely in Europe. I have a lot of friends that are in Europe, so I know it's definitely very early in the morning there. And our friends in Hawaii, it's, actually earlier in the day. So it kind of is spread out everywhere. And today I have a very special guest who's coming in from Canada. And I can't wait for you to hear more about her story. And before we jump into that, real quick, I just wanted to remind you to subscribe to our channel so that you'll get a live invite or hit the little subscribe and you'll get the bell. If you're watching us on other social media platforms, you'll find the links in each one of these descriptions of different ways that you can follow us on social media. That way you can learn a little bit more about tips and tricks and techniques and things that you can do to either get your book written, get your book finished, promote your book, market your book, and get it in the hands of people that really need it. And so our guest today, the person that I really am excited to introduce you to is Tanya McCready. Welcome, Tanya. Thank you for being here today.
Oh my gosh, absolutely my pleasure, Melanie. Thank you.
Oh, I was just saying, before we started, it's been a while since we've seen each other.
Yes.
And there's definitely a lot of things that have gone on. And I was trying to think back when we met, it was right at the beginning of COVID. And
Yeah.
you had a lot going on in your life. You had a lot of ups and downs, but just looking back, I'm just so proud of you and all the accomplishments that you've done. You hunkered down and you did the work. And I think that's an inspirational message for somebody who's stuck in the messy part of their lives where something isn't quite going the right way.
Yes.
And they have to make this decision about, do I give up or do I keep going? And what's waiting on the other side of either of those choices? And you are such a great example of somebody that's persevered through tough times. So just wanted to introduce you to our audience today and let them hear a little bit more about you. And also, if you wouldn't mind sharing a defining moment about your life with us.
Gosh, yes. Well, I guess we met. I was thinking about this almost exactly 2 years ago, Melanie. That I was referred to you by a dear friend, and my gosh, out of that, I've got a best-selling book. And I had just wrote that on a piece of paper. I'd love to have a best-selling book, and didn't think it was even possible. And then you entered my life, and it's like totally doable. Have this whole thing figured out, no problem. You just follow these steps, and you'll do it. And I'm like, wow, this lady's amazing. Um,
Well, you make it sound easy because you did everything we told you to do and you just blew it out of the water.
Oh gosh, well, it always seems easy looking back, right? When you're in the middle of it, like you say, it does not seem so easy. But the last 2 years, gosh, I mean, the book went bestseller, and I don't know, I think we're around 10,000 copies have sold now. It's got us speaking engagements. It's got us possibly a movie series that's coming. It's mind blowing where one book can take us. But our pivoting story, gosh, our defining moment, I think that has to go back to our start. Hank and I, my husband, were in Southern Ontario in kind of an urban area, and I was an engineer by profession, and my husband's a millwright by profession, and neither of us were enjoying our jobs, making great money, living the ideal life for a couple in their late 20s and early 30s, and just weren't happy. And we had got a husky after we first got married. And in our love for her and trying to figure her out, we'd seen a movie and a book, and a book changed our life because we read a book about Libby Riddles being the first woman to win the Iditarod, that crazy 1,000-mile race in Alaska. And that got us into dog sledding. And we ended up making a decision to leave our jobs, leave our home in the city, and move to the wilderness and start a dog sled tour company to turn
That's a
our
big
love of
decision.
our dogs into a lifestyle and a business. And it seemed perfectly logical to us, to no one else. From bankers to accountants to our family and friends, everybody thought we were absolutely crazy. But as I often say, no one knows what's in your heart but you. And no one knows what you're capable of but you. Sometimes your mentors can help, I guess, open a window onto a vision that you don't always see for yourself. But when you chase your heart,
Ooh, I
follow
love
your
that.
dreams, it's
Yes,
incredible
sometimes.
work. Thank you.
Wait, I want to go back for a second. What I want you to repeat that. So you said sometimes a mentor can open the window of a vision that you can't see for yourself.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
beautiful. That is a really good point, because there's another great quote that I've always heard from a coach, that you can't read the label if you're inside the jar,
Yes.
right? And sometimes we're so close to things, we don't realize how close to things we really are, and that we're so close to this miracle, this solution, this breakthrough, this defining moment, that we give up before that, because we just don't realize how close we really are. So I
Yes.
love that. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And when we started Winter Dance Dog Sled Tours, our company, it would be almost 23 years ago to the day. We had no idea where it would take us. We thought we'd build a life around our dogs and build a family and just a great lifestyle. But if anyone told me now where we would be, I would have went, no way that's possible. Because sometimes, you think you can see, and then you get that far, and all of a sudden you can see a whole lot further. So yeah, just keep dreaming. It's amazing. And you're a living example of that, Melanie, where just keeping dreaming and following those dreams can take you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, and I think that's, for me, my greatest joy is, I feel like, kind of like, almost like the mom or the grandmother to like everybody, because, or maybe the doctor is a better term. Like, I love being in that delivery room and helping people give birth to their book baby, but I don't want to be changing diapers at 2 a.m. You know what I mean? So I get to like celebrate all the wins and the glory, but it is a lot of work. I know. I mean, I just released my own
It's
book last week, and I hadn't done one in a while because I've been so busy helping other people, and I forgot how hard that was, doing it all at once. I literally wrote the entire book in 37 hours.
wow.
Um,
Wow.
and it just sat down and it flowed out. Like, I did it over a period of a few days, and it just, like, I knew it was in me. It just needed to download it. And I had, the outline of what I wanted to do and the steps that I wanted to do. And it was really just kind of, I didn't have to research because it was already in my head. I just needed to get it out and extract it in the right pieces. And yeah, it went from like, writing it to editing, formatting, and actually launching in less than a week. I don't recommend that. That was really hard. But what everything we did in a week is what we usually tell people it takes at least 8 weeks to do. And I just wanted to challenge myself and say, can I really do this? And we did it. So yay team. The team that I cracked the whip on, and they got it done. So it was pretty cool.
Well, I think, writing a book seems like such a huge process, right? And our first one that we did before we met you, that we self-launched, and, it did next to nothing. Um, that one took me a lot longer. Now, our children were younger, so and anyone that says you can't write a book when you have kids, not true. I can tell you all kinds of steps and hacks that I did to do that. But the second one, when I really thought about how many hours I put into it, certainly it was a commitment, but you spend way more hours and time thinking about how you're ever going to get this done than you actually spend writing it when you sit down and commit and actually make yourself focus and put things on paper.
That's
And
true. And I think, honestly, I think that's because as human beings, we tend to complicate things, because if
yes,
something is simple, we feel like we're not smart enough. Like, if I'm so smart, how come I can't finish writing this book? How come I can't get it done? I know what's at stake. I know I can do it. But then you're right. We spend these hours going in our heads in circles with doubts and fears or imposter syndrome, or questioning everything and wondering, how do we know when it's done? And what's it supposed to look like? And how many words? And we get so caught up in our head that we rob people of the opportunity to read the finished product.
yeah,
And I think that's the travesty, is like that there's so many people that want to write a book. It's been estimated as much as 81% of people out there want to write a book, and only 1% actually do. And
wow,
I think that's because the voices within take over, and they take the wheel and crash the project.
yeah. I don't have time. I know so many people have said to me, I don't have time to write a book. Well, I mean, I didn't do it in 37 hours like you did, Melanie. You know, I would literally, when the kids were little, I'd be like, okay, I'll take them to the beach, and they can play in the sand for an hour, and I'll sit by them with a laptop and I'll type for 30 minutes. And that's how I wrote our first book, literally 30, 60 minutes at the time, while the kids were in the park, while they were playing at the beach. You don't have to do it in one chunk. You can find those little pieces in your day to write a book, truly.
And that's amazing. So tell us a little bit about the book journey, and also, how you decided to do this book or write about this story.
Yeah, so our first book was my husband and our dog's journey on their first Iditarod race, because that had been our dream for 13 years, was to run the Iditarod. And unfortunately, that dream didn't end as we planned. Hank was left about 300 miles short of the finish line when his race ended. And it was a really hard time. I mean, financially, we'd invested, I think, $50,000 to run that race, 13 years of dreaming, 4 years of
Wow.
planning. Um, so it was devastating, and we had made it a very public goal. So, people had sponsored the team, and Facebook was pretty new then, but they were following on Facebook. And um, so it's really hard to have a public failure. And for my
Mm.
husband, it was even worse because he felt he had failed all of us. He felt he'd failed me, our children, our dogs, everyone that had sponsored him. So the following month was really tough for him. I mean, he didn't leave our property. He didn't talk to his family. He got to the point he was hardly talking to us.
Mm.
And, I remember when it was late April, beautiful time in Canada, generally spring's coming, and we were sitting on our porch, and normally it's one of our favorite times of year, and he was just staring down, saying nothing. And I remember being so afraid for him because I knew he needed help, but I also knew, being a proud man, he wasn't going to ask for it. So I did the only thing I thought might help. I said, "Why don't we run the race again next year?" And I remember he looked up at me, he goes, "No way in hell we are ever going back to that race." And I said, "Okay, what about the lesser known 1,000-mile race, the Yukon Quest? Let's go try that, prove," because people had said such, online horrible things, right? It was all his fault, and he didn't know what he was doing, and he should have never been there. And it really dinged his self-esteem. So I said, "Let's go prove it wasn't you, prove it wasn't our dogs." And I saw the moment he made his decision, because just like that, I had my husband back.
That it's like
He
the
wasn't,
light switch and the light comes on again.
he wasn't stuck in the past, focused on all his quote unquote failures, what he should have done, what he could have done, what he didn't do. All of a sudden, he had a new dream and a new vision to chase. So, at the end of the book, we did finish that race. And our fans had asked for the follow up to Iditarod Dreamer, because, of course, it ended on that low note for a decade.
Mm.
But I was too busy to write that book. And then I got afraid, because even though our book didn't, sell tons, people loved it. So I was like, gosh, like, what if they don't like the next one? Like, what if I don't write as well? I mean, I'm not a huge writer. So that kept me stopped for a couple of years, because I was like, well, what if I write it and people hate it? And I don't, because I couldn't remember how I really did the first one. So eventually, when I met you, Melanie, it's like, okay, everything just came together. It's got to be wrote. And COVID hurt our business huge. So I'm like, I have to do something. So writing the book was one of those somethings. And now I'm so glad I did, because we've captured that story with so many lessons in a book that our children, our grandchildren will have forever.
And
But even,
what I want to think about too for a second is, because I know when I was writing my first book, my mentor said, stop thinking of who your book is going to help and start thinking of who it's going to hurt if you don't finish it. And I went, ugh. And then, like, the next day, this lady took her life in my hometown because she had been mourning the loss of her son. And my book was about coping with the loss of a child. And I thought I could have helped her. Right. And it really hit me like a ton of bricks. And it just made me think about with yours. I mean, the fact that, congratulations, by the way, that you have sold 10,000 copies of this book. And here's a book that we're talking about right here. I put the link in there for y'all as well. If you're curious about this incredible story, it is so entertaining, so well done, so inspiring. And not only the journey of 1,000 miles, but the journey of 1,000 pages of, like, writing this book and all the ups and downs and expectations and fears and everything. But think of the 10,000 people whose lives would not have been impacted and touched if you hadn't finished it. If you would have let all those voices in your head win, if they would have taken the wheel and crashed your dream, right? And all the things that have come from that, it's amazing to think, like, being on the other side, it's so clear to see it. And, like, that is the most important message that I always try to get across to people when we talk about books, is just get it finished, and just get it out there.
absolutely. And, as you'll remember, one of the final stories in the book, Melanie, kind of touches on what you and I are talking about, being so close, but feeling like you're so far away. I mean, Hank and the team had traveled 950 some miles on this race, 950 miles. and he almost quit because they couldn't find the finish line, literally. What no one knew was a snowmobile race was happening in Fairbanks the next day, and those organizers had come out and taken all the trail markers for the dog sled race down.
Oh no.
And everyone that Hank would pass would be like, oh yeah, the finish line's only 40 miles away. And he'd be like, okay, 40 miles, 6 hours, I can do this. And yet he'd go another trail, follow another trail, hit a dead end, hit somebody's backyard, just constantly had to keep turning the team around and making mistakes and going back to where he was. And like any team, when your leader keeps making mistakes, the team loses faith in their leader. The leader loses faith in himself, and everything starts breaking down. And he said that night, had I known that I could have even found the truck, he said, I would have quit. But he said, I didn't even have any idea where our truck was. So he said, I couldn't quit. And then he came around a bend in the river, and he was in Fairbanks. But this river goes forever, it bends forever. And he saw a bonfire on the side. So the team crossed the river and went to the bonfire. And there was a little girl out, and talk about how you don't know how you change someone's life. And she had batons like you see at the airports, and she was waving that team in like they were a jumbo jet. And they stopped at the fire, and somebody put a hot coffee in his hand, and he said, how far till the finish line? And they said, sir, only 20 miles. But then they said something nobody else had told them. They said, but you only have to stay on the river. The finish line is straight on the river. Just don't get off the river. But no one had told him that before. So as he was about to pull away, somebody stepped forward and said, sir, do you have a free hand? He held out his mitt. Somebody put something in it. He put it in his pocket, never thought about it again. The next morning after he crossed the finish line, he was like, somebody gave me something last night. And he pulled this coin out of his pocket.
Oh, wow.
And he was running through the Air Force Base in Fairbanks that night, and soldiers had come out to cheer him on. And what this coin is it's a challenge coin from the Air Force Base in Fairbanks. And the soldier said, because we found the soldier later online, he said what that team had gone through, the storms, the mountain ranges to reach the finish line, was so much more than I did for that coin. They deserved it more than I.
Oh.
But 50 miles or less from the finish line, he almost quit. And because of kindness from a stranger, directions, encouragement, clarification, communication, he got to the finish line that night. And I shared that story with Coca-Cola. I guess that was in January when they were, trying to set new goals and get through the pandemic, which in Canada we got locked down so much. And they made a challenge coin for Coca-Cola from this story.
I love it. Yay. That's awesome. Oh my gosh. That is so cool. And that was one of your dreams, was to do a keynote, to speak to Coca-Cola. And, I remember we first talked about that, even taking this beautiful metaphor of, your husband, Hank, and his team of dogs, and applying that to the business world, where we always joke about the sales team. It's like that. There's a great book called Sales Dogs that was like, each dog is different, and they all can't be leaders, and they have to be able to work together, and you have different personalities. And it was great to see how you could take this story of the team working together to cross the finish line and apply it into the corporate side, to a business side, and be able to turn that into corporate speaking engagements and things like that. It's just amazing. So sorry, I was just so excited about that, the Coca-Cola thing. That's amazing. And so what happened from there?
Yeah, so we did a TED Talk this spring. We've talked to Coca-Cola, I think 3 times this year. We've done several more. We were flown out to Vancouver for a big conference out there to share. So many opportunities. And while people often don't see how a dog team traveling across the Arctic can have anything to do with their life, the stories, as you know, Melanie, they're about inspiration and overcoming and leadership and teamwork and just following your heart and passion and making the right decisions for your team as best you can in the moment. So while they're stories from a dog team, they're truly stories that can impact any team and any leader and anyone that needs inspiration in life.
I love it. And, and it's just such a great reminder of what is truly possible when you have a goal and you have the right team and you set the goal, you push yourself, you get the right equipment, you get the right preparation, and, you surround yourself with the people that are positive, that are supportive. I think one of the things that really stood out to me in your book is how great of a partnership that you and Hank have, how much he had to rely on you to show up at each checkpoint with the right amount of food, and you're taking care of the dogs and you're trying to make sure he's okay and giving everybody their rest and making sure they're in the right place and bringing in reinforcements and provisions and like all these things that could go wrong with one wrong turn or one like you said, one mishap along the way, and they have to just lead by their instincts, and the dogs have to kind of figure it out too. And it was like I kept thinking, how amazing is it that you two chose each other in this marriage, in this relationship, and you committed to this dream. And when you first got together, you had no idea you were going to build this kind of life, but you chose well.
Sled team by then.
Well, you both chose very well, and you complement each other. Your strengths and weaknesses were outlined. So it wasn't just about the race and everything. I found a lot of love and support as a husband and a wife. And like that part really appealed to me as a woman, like to see how much you supported him, how much he supported you, and how well you worked together as a team. And then that extends out of the business into life with your family, but also him supporting this whole book process and you doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that part as well, to share the story that was so personal and private. And painful for him to be that vulnerable and share that with people. Like it's incredible. So I'm really proud of you guys and everything you've been through. And thank you for your courage to get it out there.
No, I mean, and like you say, it did take Hank being okay with sharing his stories because, and if there's somebody out there has the same partnership, and for a while I thought I couldn't write this book. Hank didn't want to write this book. And my thought was, okay, how can I write it, but from your perspective? Because it has to be from his perspective. He's the one racing. And what we found worked really well for us is we would just sit down, like no stress, no pressure, often when we were driving somewhere. And I would just start talking about certain sections of the race. And then he would start remembering things and I would record everything he said. So then I could help put the reader into his position. And I think in a way, he says it's more descriptive than if he did it because I had to make it descriptive enough for me to understand it so I could truly write it. So sometimes that partnership actually works really well when you're writing from someone else's perspective because it helps you have a lot more clarity where they might miss some of those details because it's just in their head and they think it's obvious. But yeah, Hank revealing, I mean, his mental health struggle, it took a while before he was willing to do that. But the turning point was when he said, if I can help one other person, then I'm willing to share and be vulnerable. But there's one part in the book, and you might remember it, Melanie, when he's leaving a checkpoint for a 200-mile run, the longest run he had ever done unassisted. And he told me this in one of our chats, and he goes, I've never told you, so this is 10 years later. He said that I stopped when I left that checkpoint, and the road crosses the Yukon River there. And he said, I waited to see the truck go over that bridge. And he said, it didn't come and it didn't come and it didn't come. He said, I didn't want to talk to you. I just wanted to wave. I just wanted to see you once more because he was really afraid of that section of trail. And in his mind, we didn't come because he's like, it was so stupid. But he's like, I'm like, oh, they forgot me. They don't care about me. He forgot that we have to clean up and look after the dogs and do everything before we can leave. So when we were proofing the book, he didn't read it until it was totally done. And we sat on the screen, I think the night before you released it, actually. And he read the whole thing. And we got to that part. And he's like, you put that in there? Because he was tearing up and he was crying. He was so emotional. And I'm like, I'm sure we can take it out. Melanie can delay the launch. I know, it's okay. It can stay. He said, it is true. So sometimes, and then we've had people reach out to us that thank us because men don't talk about mental health as much, right? So yeah, sometimes that courage and vulnerability is what truly can help someone.
Well, and I think there's definitely, I mean, and Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. She studied it for 20 years. So it's literally a science to her. And she talks about how people think, especially men, think that being vulnerable is being weak. And it actually takes a lot of courage and strength to be vulnerable. It's really easy to just put up a wall and keep everybody out and not allow yourself to feel anything. It's really, really hard to be vulnerable. And in relationships, you can't have a deeper connection unless you allow that. I mean, as parents, we feel that vulnerability for our children, with our children, because their lives are very vulnerable, and we feel that way by loving them And in relationships, we have to give into that side that we fight sometimes. And even in business, I mean, the world is so transparent now that there's no secrets. Like everything in the world is out on the internet for everybody to see all the time. There's hardly any privacy anymore. So the people that are just shut down and like Stepford wives and like button down and it's all good in the hood and like there's no problems in my life. No one trusts that. It's first of all, it's BS. No one believes it. And so when you can be authentic and you can be real and you can be vulnerable and share that, it just goes such a long way. And in business, I think it really does make people feel more connected to you because you're authentic, and that transparency, that vulnerability creates authenticity and trust and connection. So it used to be considered in business a weakness, especially for men to share that. But I'm finding that more and more people are feeling comfortable sharing those things publicly. And then it removes the shame for other people who feel like, oh, I can't talk about that. And it gives them a safe place to talk about it. And it just creates this beautiful flow of energy and information that connects people at such a deeper level. So
Yes.
I'm glad you shared that. And I'm glad he was okay with it. And I wouldn't have delayed the launch. I would have said, all right,
I
Hank,
didn't know
we'll
that.
wait, we'll change it later. Wink, wink. No, I was kidding.
Exactly. Yeah, but what you say is so true, because I know when we start sharing on stages and, you know, as you know, our stories with our dogs are very powerful, and they're our family. So to get up and share stories about them that are so powerful and so personal can be very emotional. And this book was wrote on a race 10 years ago, so not all these dogs are still with us. Thankfully, they were with us through their old age. But I remember the first time we teared up on stage, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it was a corporate group, all senior executives, 7-figure salaries. And I'm like, this is a disaster. They're never going to hire us back. They're going to wonder why we ever brought these people to our stage. And when we finished, they gave us a standing ovation and they hired us to come back 6 more times. And I was like, what just happened? Because they were all so formal and, business like before our talk. And then when we finished, they were all coming to stage and they were telling us stories about their pets and, their losses and their achievements. And that's when I realized that vulnerability on stage really is when you connect with an audience, because they feel your heart and then they want to share their heart too. So
Absolutely.
sometimes what we think is true is just not the truth.
And I think that heart and soul and the vulnerability is, especially when you're sharing a very personal, private story. Like a lot of what we focus on is nonfiction. I mean, I love nonfiction books like self-help. And, the thing I love about your book is not only is it a nonfiction true story, but it's also got a lot of tools in there that kind of keep you inspired. And when you're going through something tough and you realize that you're so close to the end, like you said, it's not about giving up. And even in some cases, it's not even about finishing the race or about winning the race. For him, he was so upset that he couldn't finish the first one because of these circumstances. And I don't want to ruin the ending for those who haven't read that book. And then the second one, like how close he was to giving up at the end. And he would have never forgiven himself if he had given up, and it was like the kindness of these people, like you said, just a little girl with the bonfire, and like just this little spark of hope sometimes is all it takes to get you through the coldest, darkest time. And sometimes it comes from within you. Sometimes it comes from faith. Sometimes it comes from another person along the way that's a stranger, like what you experienced there. And I think your book becomes that light for others, right? Like the hardship and the heartache and, that triumph of that spirit of getting back up and just proving to himself that he could do it. And that's all that mattered. He needed that spark back because it had gone out. The pilot light had gone out in his eyes, like you said, and you just saw it immediately when he finally had this quest and this other challenge. And so I think that's the idea, is that when people look at how it correlates to their own life and everything that they're going through, then they can all relate to this journey, even if they've never been dog mushing or even been to Canada or ever been on a race. Like we all are part of that ultimate human race, of rushing to get somewhere and feel like we've arrived.
Yeah. And that little girl, I mean, we met the soldier. Well, we haven't met in person, but electronically we've met the soldier that gave Hank the coin. But the little girl, because it was just a random group of soldiers from the base who came out, we still to this day have no idea who she is.
Oh,
So almost every time I'm on stage, I share her story, and she has no idea, 12 years later, that one act she did as a child touched someone's life so deeply.
and
It
I
blew.
think there's a great lesson in that too, Tanya, because I think about the woman that stepped in front of the train and took her life, right? When I was trying to get my book finished, and that it motivated me and inspired me to take massive action. I didn't know her. I didn't know her son. I don't even know their names. I wish I did, but I just knew that like it impacted me so strongly that I realized like I felt responsible for someone else's death or someone else's choice or someone else's, decision to give up, because I knew I had resources that were trapped in here that I was trying to get out, making a million excuses. And I never wanted to lose somebody again. And the other thing that I learned and I have this one here too, this was my first book. It came out like 6 years ago, called Defining Moments, Coping with the Loss of a Child. And there's like 50 different stories in here of parents who've gone through loss in their lives and have learned to navigate that journey and give hope to other people and resources. So it was like, once I wrote it, I was shocked at how many people saw me as the authority. I mean, and that's what we do. We say, you're the expert. You wrote the book on it. So
Right.
all these people were calling me, and many of them were suicidal because they had lost a child and they were so distraught. And they said, well, you're the expert. You wrote the book. Fix me. Help me. And I thought, oh no, what if I say the wrong thing? I'm not equipped for this, So I went back and I studied with my mentor, Tony Robbins, which I think you know as well. Um, and we, I ended up getting some tools to not only help heal myself, and it was so helpful to get some validation to feel like, okay, I have this, I got this, I've got these tools, they work for me. I know I can teach them to someone else because I've done it. And even though I wasn't licensed in anything, I didn't have like a formal degree, I had the life experience of getting through something so difficult that a lot of other people don't survive. And I knew that I had that ability to help people. And it just gave me such confidence. When the book came out, it hit #1 on the bestseller list. Then I had these tools, and it opened up all these doors to an entire new life that, like, all these missing links. My whole life, I wanted to write a book and I wanted it to have impact, but I didn't know how, right? I didn't know the steps I needed to take. And I don't think most people realize, and I know you and I have talked about this, and we both didn't realize how much the book was really, truly going to touch so many people,
Yeah.
because we're at the thousands of books as well. And it's like every single day, somebody buys the book, somebody gives the book as a gift, someone else says, hey, I know someone that needs this. And they now see you as this authority, and you're living this example of what it looks like in real life to experience this challenge. And I just think it's when I look at it, it just blows my mind. Like, it's the vision of what we both wanted, but I wasn't sure how I was going to get there. And now I can look back and connect the dots much quicker, and like help other people get there faster and not make the mistakes I made.
Absolutely. I think it's Steve Jobs, isn't it, who says you can't connect the dots looking forwards. You can only connect them looking backwards.
That's so true.
So true, right? It all seems random when you're looking ahead, and then you look back and it's like, well, gosh, that all absolutely lined up perfectly, right? I mean, it was signing up for one of Tony's courses that introduced me to one of his trainers that introduced me to you. That it's just, all these crazy dots that
The dots.
part of the story. Yeah,
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I think when you're on the path, when you make this commitment and you have this vision that's so strong, there's something that speaks to your soul, and you just say, like, I know this is meant for me. I know I'm meant to do this. I don't know how, and now I look at things and I don't say, how do I do this? The first question I ask is who do I know
absolutely.
that has had success in this already that I can learn from? And for me, that was the guys who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul. They were my mentors, and I learned so much from them. But I still didn't know how to launch my own books and do all of that. So I still had to learn all these things the hard way, the expensive way, the wrong way, the upside down way, the backwards way. And it was like this long, I felt like, like Hank on the trail, like going in all these dead ends and having to turn everything around and go the other way. And I think as a leader, that is probably most people's biggest fear. If you're a CEO, president of a company, high level manager, even a small business owner with a small team or whatever, your biggest fear, at least for me, my biggest fear was I didn't want my team to lose faith in me, right? If I could make mistakes, and I would always, if I screwed up, I would own it. Like I always remember hearing, if you screw up and, you take the bullet as the leader, and if everything's going well, you give everybody else the credit, right? Because ultimately it's like, if you're running a business, everything begins and ends, the buck stops here, everything begins and ends with you. And I think that I can really relate to that part of the story as a business person, saying I understand, even in dog language, how they were starting to lose faith in him, and they all wanted to quit. So I thought that was really powerful in such an unspoken way.
And energy is so huge, right? We talk about a lot of that around the dogs because, technically they don't understand English. I mean, I'd still hesitate to say they do to somewhat, but energy is really how they communicate. And when Hank's energy is down, I often say I can be 1,000 miles from that team and watch his GPS tracker, and knowing the weather and the conditions they're running in, I'll know what his mindset is. Because if that team is running strong, I know he's doing great. But if that team is struggling, I know it's because his energy's off, because literally whatever he is feeling manifests in them almost immediately. And I think as humans, we're the same. We don't talk about it as much. We're like, oh no, we talk, we communicate, but we all read and feel energy and we respond to it.
Absolutely.
So it's so important as a leader to control your energy, because it impacts everything downline of you just so much. I think more than most people realize.
Absolutely. And it was funny. I was thinking about this. I remember when you first started doing this, you were, your expectation was, oh, I'm just going to write another book and maybe we'll sell a few copies here and there, during COVID, and make a little bit of money and get through the winter, literally, because, your whole business was shut down. Tell us about what that was like. I mean, talk about facing your fear. This was even after the race and even after your first book. And now here you are wanting to write a book, but you're in the middle of COVID. Your entire income in the country is completely shut down. And not just for a few months, but if you're in tourism, like so many people, like you have no backup plan. Like there is no other income stream in that scenario. How did you get through that? And what really helped you get through that?
In a way, our philosophy around the races helped us, because when we're trying to prepare for those races, we try to think of every possible outcome the team could have to encounter. And we either strategize for it, we train for it, we pack for it, so that hopefully they never need it. But in the worst case scenario, there's a plan in place. So when COVID hit, winter tourism, of course, was the first hit, because, March breaks or spring breaks in Canada all fell apart. International people stopped coming. Toronto all stayed home. And we were like, okay. And, our government, probably similar to yours, was like, oh, it'll be a few weeks, if, not that long of a thing. And
oh yeah, 2 months tops. We're like, 2 months?
Talking years, right?
Yeah.
We're all like, months, what? So we were like, okay, what is the worst case scenario? And we're like, the worst case scenario is we lose our income next winter. And I mean, nobody was talking about that, but we're like, wow, that would be, catastrophic for our business to lose.
That's like a farmer losing their crop, like everything they've invested and planted and to try to grow, and the whole thing is ruined.
So that's what we started planning on. And that's what brought me to you. We're like, okay, well, one of the contingency is the book. One is speaking more, virtual tours. You were the first one that brought that up. What if we could do virtual dog sled tours? So having that kind of planning in motion 9 months before we actually lived losing 3/4 of that winter is what got us through it.
I love that. And it's funny because we had talked about that as an option to, what about virtual dog sled? And you executed it flawlessly, because I remember sitting there on, I think it was Christmas Eve with my kids, and we were all stuck in COVID, as the whole world was. And we were cozied up in our little cabin up near Yosemite. And it was so fun to just put on this TV and like feel like we were part of this dog sled. Like we could hear the crunching of the snow. We could hear the dogs barking. We could see the paw prints of the foxes on the trails and all these kind of things. And we could do everything but smell it. We could feel it. We could hear it. We could see it. And it just made me want to go so bad, and it was like, I remember at first you were like, well, what if we do that? What if it takes away from the experience and then they won't want to come here? That's like a chef saying, what if I give out my recipe? And you know what? People try to do it at home and it sucks. And then they just can't stop thinking about it and they have to go to the restaurant and get it. Right.
I have to admit, Melanie, the first time you said that, I was like, that's flipping crazy. Nobody's going to totally go virtual time. It took a long time for me to go, okay, let's just trust it, see what this happens. And, lo and behold, old age homes started buying it because they couldn't take their residents out, like to the malls or to anything. So they started buying it for their residents to watch. And it was another stream of revenue for us that one.
I love it. I love it. See, I'm a visionary. I'm a very visual person. And I never understood until I had a mentor that said, you can see things at a 30,000 foot level. That's not normal. And I'm like, it's not. I thought everybody could do that. And so it's a blessing and a curse, because sometimes I can see something in somebody that they can't see in themselves. I can see the potential of whether it's a relationship or whether it's a person's skill set. Like, I had to hire a lot of people in throughout my life and my business, not based on their skills, but based on their potential. And I'm investing in what I think and who I think they can be. Right. And that can be scary as a business person. And yet you did the same thing by, you took this idea and you ran with it, and you had to put all this money into it and put this whole team. Like it was just an idea, but you actually put it together and made it happen. And it was amazing what you did. And then it just got people excited to come out when they could really come in person. And then we also talked about how cool it was now that you were going to take this journey and turn it into a corporate speaking engagement to try to get speaking, gigs. Like that was the other goal, is your book was more of a speaker platform than just a client conversion model or a list builder, which is the other kinds that we talk about. And what's funny is we said, if you turn it into this corporate speech where you share the similarities between a sales team and the dog sled with the leader, right? Then you could actually create the dog sled experience as a corporate adventure, like a sales contest. So the sales team that or the people that win, that hit the biggest numbers that year, their incentive is to come out and do the dog sled. So like, I just thought that was a really unique and creative way to also tie everything back to it.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, you don't know this, but the first company is actually running that promotion this fall.
That's awesome.
Come dog sledding. So another one of your great ideas that is very important.
Well, and again, this is all because you finished the book. So like it's, if you, and I tell people this all the time, if you own a business and you don't have a book, you are literally losing 6 figures, maybe even 7 figures a year. And I'm just talking about revenue streams beyond selling books. It's speaking engagements, it's credibility and authority in your field. I mean, you have this ability now where people come, and now you've even built tiny homes on the area. So you took that downtime and you hunkered down and you were able to make good use of that time and build these little cabins on your property. So instead of having to stay at hotels, they stay with you, which is another income stream that you've done. That I mean, all of it kind of just evolved over the last 2 years. It's remarkable to see your growth. So,
and sometimes it comes out of necessity, right? I mean, we thought our business was really strong going into COVID. Like, who dreamed you'd be shut down and locked down for a whole winter? Right? Like, it was never in any of our forecasts. But when your back's against the wall, it forces you to become incredibly resourceful. And so, glory knows nobody wanted COVID, and I wouldn't want to live through it again. But the silver lining is it has made our business a lot stronger, and it will magnify, what it will be in a year or two to something we had never even dreamed of. So there's always blessings if you just look for them.
Well, and I love something I saw that you posted recently on Facebook or one of the social media companies. You had posted this thank you to your bank. And I just thought that was so cool. And what's funny is I was actually meeting with bankers and I took a screenshot of that and showed that to them and said, don't say no one ever says thank you, because here's 24 years later, like, look at what you have done. And it all begins like you have the vision and you have the dream, but you have to fund your mission. Like even Mother Teresa, she wrote 30 books. She built $100 million organization that she started from scratch, but she really understood that she had to fund the mission, because if you don't fund the mission, you can't help people if you don't have the money to help people. So it's not like, it's like, you know, some people get so caught up in, oh, it's money hungry, all making money, but it's the more money you make, the more people you can impact. And the same with your book. The more books you have out there, the more you promote your book, market your book, get it out. Like you said, give it out for free. I mean, I remember you posted something once that said, I just made $3,000 by giving out a free book. How'd that happen? Melanie said that would happen, but I didn't believe her.
And it happens now all the time, actually, because you know, I'll meet somebody or whatever, and they seem interested in our story, and so I'll just follow up with a nice little card and send them a copy of the book, and usually a small bottle of our maple syrup, because we make our own maple syrup too. And it's amazing just how that law of reciprocity comes back to you, right? I mean, because they'll read the book and then they get more interested, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, don't you consider coming and speaking to our organization? So yeah, it's the little things, but if you don't have that book, they're not going to know much about you.
I love it. I love it. I just think there's so much, there's just so many great nuggets in that. And I just think the key is just to do it, you know? And I mean, I think if you were going to speak to somebody who's had this idea in their head, like maybe they've had similar circumstances in their life and they're thinking, who would want to read about this? You know, what advice would you give to somebody who's on the fence? And by the way, if you're on the fence, it just makes your butt hurt. You know, it's not a comfortable place to be. Either you're on or you're off. But to just sit there on the fence for so long is not good for anybody. You're not helping people. You're torturing yourself. And so much of it is just a lack of clarity. And so, like, what advice would you give to somebody who's in that position?
I think a couple pieces. Like I was going to say, like you said, it's torture, right? Because you're just warring with yourself in your head, and you're getting absolutely nowhere except more discouraged because you feel like you can't make a decision. You don't know what's right. It just loops and loops and loops and loops and loops. But the one thing that I learned in 23 years of business that I wish I had known 23 years ago was that you should pay for speed and pay for knowledge and pay for connections. And that's what we've done the last 2 years. I mean, when we had no revenue, we invested in your course. I invested in, I don't even want to know how many courses and mentors I've invested in the last 2 years. Looking at when our accountant looks at it, she goes, that was the stupidest thing you've ever done. And I'm like, yes, looking at the last 2 years financial, it looks stupid. But when you see this year's financial, we would never, ever see this year's financial if I hadn't invested in those last 2 years. So 23 years ago, I wish I'd known that. I wish I had found the people who've walked the path, who know the answers, who can get you there fast, rather than hammering my head figuring it all out like you did writing your first bestseller, Melanie.
Yeah.
In spades, that in my mind is the biggest business lesson anyone can ever learn, because you will save yourself literally years of time, and you can't even imagine how much revenue you will make yourself by saving yourself all of those years of trying to figure something out that somebody else walks in and goes, this is how you do it. There's a gentleman I started working with a year and a half ago, met similar, all my dots through you guys, Tony, Dean, you guys. And I could never see our business over low 7 figures. I knew we were there. After one meeting with him, I was like, holy crap. Like, I now see an 8-figure business. I don't think I would have ever seen that without him opening those ideas that I just didn't see. They were right in front of me, but I couldn't see them. So pay for speed, pay for connections, pay for proximity, because in a year or two, you will not believe where you will be if you make that investment in yourself. And second thing, don't think you don't have time. I know we don't have time for every excuse in the book. We all had the same amount of time. You know, I raised 4 kids between they were 10 and 2 years old when I wrote our first book. I didn't have a babysitter. I didn't have daycare. If you're committed enough, there's always a way to make it work. And with Melanie or with any great organization I've joined, there's people that have done what you're trying to do, that have had the challenges that you're dealing with. They've got the answers for you. They'll help you figure it out.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And then, by the way, I put our website here, mydefiningmoments.com with an S. Make sure you put the S on. If you want, you can take a quick look at what we do. You can look at the resources. You can fill out a quick application. If you have a book that you're trying to get finished or you want some kind of help or support, we actually do a free consult. We'll jump on the phone with you and really help you map out where you're getting stuck and what you need to actually get it done. I mean, imagine if you can just get past that one little hurdle. And it's always something small. We think it's something so big because we're like, it's so big, we can't get past it. And then sometimes someone else can come in and give you a different perspective and say, oh, that's it. You just tweak this. And sometimes it's just a matter of, oh, I didn't know that I blew a breaker. My daughter's in her 20s. She had to learn what it meant to go outside and flip the breaker back on. Like, that's not something you learn as a kid. That's an adult thing. And like, it changed everything when she could flip the breaker back on. Life was good again. Internet worked and everything, and it's like, sometimes it just takes that different perspective to flip that one little thing or that one small hinge that's going to open the big door. And that's what books can do for you. So I really, really appreciate you sharing all of that. We would love to be there in your own journey with all of you and love to hear about your books. We want to read them. We want to help you write them, and we want to celebrate them as they come out into the world as well. And, who knows, you might actually have a similar journey to Tanya and Hank and what they've experienced. I just think it's amazing looking back at how much you've done in such a short amount of time. And really, it's just come from taking massive action. And I think that's the key is you can have all the knowledge in the world and all the people giving you the best advice. And if you don't actually do it and don't hold yourself accountable to it, then sometimes it's not even about learning. It's about taking action and actually doing it, and that makes a huge difference. I always end our show with a quote. And I think today I'm going to honor something from Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away today, which we just got the news recently. So we're definitely thinking about our friends in the UK and how much of a powerful day today is. I mean, this is the longest running monarchy, I think, in the history of monarchies, 70 years, I believe it was. And all within a few hours of her passing, and then her son to take over as king, the first king of England that we've seen in our generation, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So, normally I want to do a book quote, but it's just a simple thing that she said. She said, "I have to be seen to be believed." Queen Elizabeth II. This is, to me, very befitting for today and for all of the things that we have talked about. Taking a dream that's in our head and getting it, it's got to be up here first. If it doesn't start and begin here and in your heart, it can't exist in the world. No. And that's the key. And then it's other people will help extract it from you and support you. Because I think the biggest mistake I see authors make, number one, they just write their book and they don't think about who it's for and what it's going to do and what they want their book to do for them. So they don't have a goal for their book. And number two, they have the book angel and the book devil are talking and fighting amongst themselves. And sometimes the book devil wins more often than the book angel. So it's like developing those voices and being able to know which ones to listen to and which ones to just kick off your shoulder. Because they both have valid voices and points, but they can hurt or harm in different ways. And really just not going somewhere and writing it in isolation. It's not like, you have to be like the Unabomber going in some remote cabin and hiding away from the world to type something out of your head. If anything, it's a collaboration. And the more you can include and encourage other people to get involved, even testing your titles or picking your book covers, like what we did. I think you had 850 votes on all of yours. It was amazing how many people voted.
Yeah, I can't remember the number, but I know being just blown away. It was like, wow.
There's that many people that were excited about your book and getting engaged in the process just because you asked them to. Like, hey, what do you think of this title? And you have that many people voting on your book cover, which cover to use, which title to use. And that just goes a long way with people when they feel, it's like when you're pregnant, you go tell everybody, hey, I'm preggers. And you have that little sonogram picture. This is like having your book cover made and you look at it every day and you can't wait for this little book baby to come out into the world, and everybody's excited and celebrating it. And instead of giving you a baby shower, they do a book launch where everybody comes and buys your book, and they go give you a beautiful review on Amazon, and they support you, and they share it and tell other people about it. And I think it was Elon Musk that said, um, we need to do more business showers instead of baby showers, instead of just baby showers.
So true, right?
Yeah, it's so funny. But I really appreciate you being here today. And I know this has been a difficult day for you as well. I just saw something right before we started today about how you had lost someone that was very important to you. Do you want to share that, or do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So another musher, a dog sledder. Well, mushers are called dog sledders. I know that's not always known. A man who won 8,000-mile races in his career after fighting and battling through cancer. Um,
Wow.
an incredible human being, and certainly a legend and an icon and a hero in our family before we ever met him. And when we met him, so often when you meet your heroes, they kind of let you down, right? I mean, it's not their fault. You put them on such a pedestal. And so I remember when our kids got to meet him and we got to meet him, and I was like, oh gosh, it might be a letdown for them. And I was kind of trying to prepare them, like he's a real man, um, but I have to say he's the only champion I've ever met that didn't let us down. He was such a
Mm.
beautiful human being. He took time for our kids. They were too shy to ask him to do an autograph, so he came over. He's like, "Would you guys mind if I sign that?" I mean, he just read their fear and took it over. And us being a rookie team in our first Iditarod, we kind of felt like the outsiders, being from Ontario A, or and running purebred dogs versus the Alaskans. And he was so kind. He bought my husband a ladle, such a simple thing, but he was a champion at the time, and he went to a store. It wasn't about the money. It was about the time that he took the day before the race to buy that, and just left it on our hood of our truck. Um, and as we started the race, he went out 4 bibs behind us, so 8 minutes behind us. And as we passed him and his team, he was harnessing his dogs, getting ready to go. He looked up and saw us going. And he ran out and slapped Hank on the back and looked him in the eye and said, "I will see you at the finish line in Nome." And that meant so much to my husband, that a champion, the champion in the sport, I mean, he was on top of the world, would take 60 seconds out of his busy day chasing a record-breaking championship that year, which he got, and just encourage somebody that's further down the line. So a beautiful man, a beautiful soul, and unfortunately, he lost his battle with cancer last night. So,
Mm.
leaving 2 very young children, and their mother had passed 2 years ago. So it's a tough day in the mushing world, and just even from a human point of view, to have 2 small children that don't have parents anymore. So, um, you know, sometimes we forget again how just one act of kindness makes all the difference to people, and that's
Oh,
what we
absolutely.
life.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that about Lance and his name. What was his name?
Lance Mackey was his name.
Lance Mackey. Well, we're
Yeah.
definitely thinking and praying for Lance and his family, and we appreciate you being here. Like I said, I know, and there's a lot going on right now with Queen Elizabeth and Lance, and there's always going to be something going on in the world that could easily get you off track in your own race. And it's the only thing I can encourage people to do is stay focused on the goal and stay focused on that finish line, whether it's your book, whether it's a relationship, whether it's trying to overcome some kind of health challenge. It's just know that the goal, that everything that you're trying to do is reachable. You can get there. Just don't give up. Keep surrounding yourself with positive people that are going to encourage you, that believe in you, and aren't going to let you give up. And I think that's a great way for us to end. Is there anything else that you want to add, Tanya, to our
I think, just
conversation?
as your and my mentor Tony Robbins often says, you overestimate sometimes what you can do in a year, but you greatly underestimate what you can do in a decade. And don't get frustrated if it's taking longer than you think, because in the grand scheme of things, in 10 years, you will be blown away just by keep moving forward as much as you can every day, where you'll find yourself.
Absolutely. And really a book it's like an employee that works for you the rest of your life. Like it's constantly working for you 24/7, and it's creating this incredible residual income. So if you say I don't have time, you're basically saying I'm going to turn down all this opportunity. So if you make time, you're investing a little bit of time, whether it takes you 50 hours or 100 hours or 3 or 4 months or a year, however long it takes you collectively to actually do it and finish it, it's still worth it, because this book is going to outlive you. This book becomes your legacy. Every single book that's ever been published has outlived its author, every single one, and when you think about it, it's worth it to invest in your legacy that way. So I appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm so glad you finished it and that you got it out there, because it's just so incredible. And I encourage you guys to click on the link that's here in the chat and get a copy of Journey of 1,000 Miles by Hank de Bruin and Tanya McCready. I wish they wouldn't say Tanya. And if you get a chance, come visit them in Canada. And tell me, how can people get in touch with you, Tanya, if they want to actually come have this experience with you in Canada?
For sure. Our website's the easiest way to get in touch. So just winterdance.com, and or if you Google dog sledding Ontario or Canada, you'll find us too. And we're about 3 hours north of Toronto and about 3 hours west of Ottawa. So we're in the beautiful wilderness of central Ontario. But we'd love to welcome you. And we're so excited that we actually have international guests booked again this year, because we've so missed our international guests the last 2 years.
I know, me too. I actually have a vacation house up near Yosemite, and I finally have Europeans, and it's been so fun to chat with them and just have that energy back here in our country as well. We've missed them as well. So it kind of feels like things are getting a little bit back to normal, though they never will be completely, I'm sure. It's nice to be able to have those experiences under our belt and know that we can pivot in these crazy times and still find a solution and find a way to come out on our feet. Right. And so anything that we've learned, we want to share with you guys. That's why we do these shows. We want you to learn from our mistakes. We want you to feel inspired to take some massive action, and make decide who you want to be, and say, who do you have to become today in order to get there? Like, where do you want to be? What do you need to do? And who do you have to become today to get there? Because definitely life was not made to just observe and play things safe and close to the chest. It's like you're meant to live your life and take these chances. And sometimes you fail and sometimes you succeed way beyond your wildest dreams. But no matter what, everything comes out in the end, and you know what you're made of. So Tanya, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you. It was great to see your face. Please give my love to Hank and your children and all your beautiful huskies. Oh, I love them so much. And I can't wait to come visit y'all. I want to put it on my list to come see y'all in this next winter, like at the beginning of the year, and try to figure out a trip up there for sure, because that would be a blast. We had so much fun.
And I just have to say, when you're saying that, I was thinking, I've never met an author ever that's regretted writing a book. But I've met a lot of people who've regretted not writing one.
That's a good point. And we often regret what we don't do, not what we do. So great point. Well, thank you again for being here. All of you, thank you as well. We will see you next week. Next week, we're going to have a blast. We've got a special guest on, Suzanne Sabilla, who's also one of our authors who has had huge success and has been featured in media all over the world. You're going to find out how she did it specifically, and how she also was writing her book during COVID. In very uncertain times, and ended up writing her book in 2 hours, and it even won a national book award. So it's amazing to see how many different people take a different path to get to the same result of just getting it done and putting it out there. And then the fun part begins as the world opens up to you. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and take care.